Please, Miss Hayes, I'm begging you, I can't stay outside. Grace Miller's trembling voice disappeared beneath the deafening roar of the heavy midnight rain. She crawled across the cold stone pavement with both hands, desperately trying to reach the mansion before her injured leg gave out completely. Her walking cane lay several feet behind her. Her right leg was swollen badly, the pain shooting through her body with every movement. Her thin maid's uniform clung to her skin. She was freezing, soaked, alone, and completely helpless. Grace turned toward the enormous mansion behind her. Through the rain-covered glass doors stood Victoria Hayes. Dry, warm, beautiful, and completely unbothered. The woman standing inside was wearing an expensive silk robe that probably cost more than Grace had earned in several months. In her hand was a glass of wine. On her finger glittered a diamond engagement ring worth millions of dollars. And on her face was a cold smile. Please, Grace cried again. I'm sorry if I did something wrong. Victoria didn't move. She simply stared at the crippled maid crawling through the rain. Then she smiled. You did something wrong the moment you forgot who you were. Grace's lips trembled. Please, Miss Hayes, at least let me get my medicine. Victoria slowly lifted the wine glass to her lips. Your medicine. Grace nodded desperately. My leg, please, I need it. For a moment, Victoria looked down at Grace's swollen leg. There was no sympathy in her eyes. Only satisfaction. Maybe, Victoria said coldly, if your leg hurts badly enough tonight, you'll finally remember that people like you don't belong in a mansion like this. Grace stared at her. The words cut deeper than the cold. She had heard Victoria insult her before. She had been called useless, ungrateful, a burden, a cripple. But tonight was different. Tonight, Victoria wasn't simply trying to humiliate her. She was trying to break her. Grace slowly reached for the glass door. Her fingers pressed against it. Please. Victoria looked at the security guards standing nearby. Lock the doors. The guards hesitated. One of them glanced at Grace. Miss Hayes, perhaps we should. I said lock the doors. The guard swallowed. Then the massive doors closed. Click. Grace's hand remained pressed against the glass. Victoria stood on the other side. For a few seconds, the two women stared at each other. One had everything. The other had almost nothing. But neither woman knew that before the night ended, those positions would begin to change. Grace slowly lowered herself onto the wet pavement. She had spent years learning how to survive pain. The accident that destroyed her leg had taught her that lesson. She had been 23 when her life changed forever. One moment she had been walking home. The next she had been lying beneath the wreckage of a vehicle, screaming for help. The doctors had saved her life. They had not been able to save her leg. For months afterward, Grace had struggled to accept the woman she saw in the mirror. She had once dreamed of becoming a nurse. Instead, she became someone who needed help climbing stairs. Someone who was stared at in public. Someone employers rejected after seeing her limp. Until the Sterling mansion gave her a job. It had not been charity. Grace had worked for every dollar. She cleaned. She cooked. She served. She woke before everyone else and slept after everyone else. And although she had never complained, Victoria had somehow convinced herself that Grace should be grateful for every breath she took inside the mansion. Grace dragged herself toward the entrance again. Please. Victoria remained motionless. Grace began pounding weakly against the glass. Please, I'm begging you. Victoria took another sip of wine. You should have thought about begging before you decided to challenge me. Grace stopped. Challenge you? Victoria's eyes narrowed. You think I don't know what you're doing? Grace stared at her. I don't understand. Victoria laughed softly. Of course you don't. There was something dangerous in her voice now. You think I haven't noticed how Ethan looks at you? Grace's face changed immediately. What? Victoria stepped closer to the glass. You pretend to be helpless. You limp around the mansion. You look at him with those sad eyes. You let him carry your groceries. You let him help you up the stairs. That's not true. Victoria's expression hardened. Don't lie to me. I have never tried to. You are a maid. Victoria's voice echoed through the entrance hall. Grace flinched. Victoria leaned closer. And he is a billionaire. The words hung between them. Ethan Sterling. The man whose name appeared on magazine covers. The man whose private jet could cross the country before most people could afford a plane ticket. The man who owned Sterling Global Holdings, an empire built through technology, luxury real estate, and investments worth billions. Ethan's mansion alone sat on hundreds of acres behind heavily guarded gates. There were luxury cars in the garage, a private helipad, a heated swimming pool, a wine cellar, a home theater, and an entire wing reserved for Ethan's late brother, Ryan, which Ethan had refused to change since the day Ryan died. Money had never been Ethan's problem. Loss had. 3 years earlier, Ethan had been driving Ryan home from a business meeting when their vehicle suddenly lost control. The crash killed Ryan instantly. Ethan survived. He had never forgiven himself. For months, he had barely spoken to anyone. He stopped attending parties, stopped dating, stopped trusting people. His entire life became Sterling Global Holdings. Then Victoria Hayes entered it. She came from a wealthy and influential family. Her father, Marcus Hayes, owned Hayes Capital Partners, a financial investment firm with connections to some of America's most powerful business figures. Victoria had been raised around wealth. She knew how to dress for billionaires. She knew what to say at charity events. She knew how to smile for cameras. She knew exactly how to make people believe she was kind. And she knew precisely what Ethan wanted to hear. When Ethan was grieving, Victoria had been there. When he couldn't sleep, she had stayed beside him. When the anniversary of Ryan's death came around, she had held his hand. Or at least that's what Ethan believed. What he didn't know was that Victoria's interest in him had never been accidental. She had wanted the Sterling name long before she wanted Ethan's heart. And Grace had become an obstacle. Not because Grace was trying to steal Ethan, but because Ethan trusted Grace in a way Victoria could never understand. Grace knew when Ethan was having nightmares. She knew when his old injuries hurt after long flights. She knew that he sometimes stood outside Ryan's untouched bedroom late at night. She knew which meals Ethan ate when he couldn't sleep. And more importantly, Ethan trusted her silence. That was what frightened Victoria. Because there was something about Grace that even Ethan didn't know. Something connected to Ryan. Something that Grace had carried quietly for 3 years. A secret hidden inside an old photograph. A promise made to a dying man. And a small flash drive that Grace had never dared to give Ethan. But Victoria knew none of that. All she knew was that Grace made Ethan feel something she couldn't control. And Victoria hated anything she couldn't control. Grace pressed her forehead against the glass. Mr. Sterling has always treated me with respect. Victoria's eyes flashed. Exactly. Grace looked confused. Victoria smiled. And that's why you have become a problem. Grace's heart sank. I've done nothing to you. Victoria stepped closer. Not yet. The words sent a chill through Grace. But before she could respond, Victoria's phone rang. She glanced at the screen. It was Ethan. Victoria immediately changed. Her cold expression disappeared. Her voice became soft. She answered, "Hi, sweetheart." Grace watched silently. Victoria turned away from her. Ethan's voice was faint on the other end. "Is everything okay?" Victoria looked back at Grace. Grace was still on the ground outside. Victoria smiled. "Everything is perfect." There was a pause. Then Ethan said something that made Victoria's smile briefly disappear. Grace couldn't hear the words, but Victoria's expression told her the conversation was important. "Of course," Victoria replied. "I'll see you when you get back." She ended the call. Grace stared at her. Was that Mr. Sterling? Victoria slipped the phone into her robe. "That's none of your business." Grace lowered her eyes. Victoria walked away from the glass. Then she stopped. Without turning around, she said, "You know what your biggest problem is, Grace?" Grace didn't answer. Victoria slowly turned her head. "You keep mistaking Ethan's kindness for protection." Grace's fingers tightened against the wet pavement. Victoria smiled. "One day you'll discover the difference." Then she walked away. Grace watched her disappear. She didn't know it yet, but Victoria had just made a terrible mistake. Because Ethan's kindness was not the only thing protecting Grace. There was evidence. There were secrets. And there was a promise made 3 years earlier by a man who was now dead. Grace closed her eyes. For one brief moment, she remembered Ryan Sterling. The memory came suddenly. Ryan standing beside her in a hospital corridor. His face pale. His voice low. "Grace, if anything happens to me, you have to promise me something." She had looked at him in confusion. "What?" Ryan had glanced nervously down the hallway. "Don't trust everyone around my brother." Grace had frowned. "Ryan, you're scaring me. I need you to listen." His hand had closed around hers. "Protect Ethan." The memory disappeared. Grace opened her eyes. The rain continued falling. She looked toward the mansion. "I promised," she whispered. Then her body began shaking violently. The cold had become unbearable. Her medicine was inside. Her cane was behind her. And the woman who controlled the house had just ordered the doors locked. Grace tried to stand. Her injured leg collapsed. She fell back onto the pavement. A sharp cry escaped her lips. Inside, one of the security guards looked uncomfortable. "Miss Hayes," he said quietly, "shouldn't we at least get her medication?" Victoria stopped. Slowly she turned toward him. "Are you questioning my decision?" "No, ma'am." "Then don't." The guard lowered his head. Victoria looked through the glass again. Grace was lying on the ground. Victoria's eyes narrowed. "She'll be fine." But the guard didn't look convinced. Victoria's phone buzzed again. This time it wasn't Ethan. It was her father. Marcus Hayes. Victoria answered immediately. "Father." Marcus's voice was low. "Where is Ethan?" "He left." "Good." Victoria looked at Grace. "Why?" There was silence. Then Marcus said, "Because there are things we need to discuss before that wedding." Victoria's expression changed. She walked away from the glass. "What things?" "We'll talk tomorrow." "No, tell me now." Marcus sighed. Victoria, has the maid said anything? Victoria froze. Her eyes slowly moved toward Grace. What maid? Don't play games with me. Victoria's voice dropped. Why are you asking about Grace? There was another silence. Too long. Too suspicious. Victoria's grip tightened around the phone. Father. Marcus finally spoke. Just keep her away from Ethan. Victoria stared at the crippled maid outside. Something cold moved through her. Why? Because I said so. The call ended. Victoria remained standing. For the first time that night, she wasn't thinking about Ethan. She was thinking about Grace. Why was her father suddenly interested in a crippled maid? And why had he sounded afraid? Victoria looked outside again. Grace was still lying in the rain. Victoria's anger returned. Whatever Grace was hiding, Victoria would find out. And she would make sure the maid regretted ever entering the Sterling mansion. But Victoria didn't know something. The person she was trying to destroy was the same person who had spent 3 years protecting Ethan from the truth. And when that truth finally came out, Victoria wouldn't simply lose her engagement. She would lose the billionaire. She would lose her family. She would lose the reputation she had spent her entire life building. And if Ethan discovered what really happened to Ryan, Victoria would discover that the man she thought she could manipulate was capable of something far more frightening than anger. He was capable of revenge. But before that revenge could begin, Victoria still had one more thing to do. She walked back toward the entrance. Grace slowly lifted her head. Please, she whispered. Victoria stared down at her. Then she smiled. Enjoy your night, Grace. Grace's eyes widened. Victoria turned to the security guards. Nobody opens that door. Then she walked away. The mansion swallowed her. Grace remained outside. Alone. And somewhere in the distance, beyond the massive gates, headlights suddenly appeared. A vehicle was approaching. Victoria didn't see it. Grace didn't see it. But the security guard did. He stepped toward the monitor. His eyes widened. That's impossible. The vehicle entered the estate. The guard stared at the screen. Ethan. Outside, Grace heard the sound of an approaching engine. She slowly lifted her head. The headlights grew brighter. And the vehicle stopped. The driver's door opened. A tall man stepped into the rain. Ethan Sterling had returned home. Hours earlier than expected. And the first thing he saw was the woman he trusted lying helplessly on the ground. Ethan's expression changed. Grace. Grace opened her eyes. She saw him. And despite everything Victoria had done to her, Grace's first instinct wasn't revenge. It was fear. Because she knew that Ethan was about to discover the truth. And once he did, there would be no going back. Ethan Sterling stood motionless in the rain. For several seconds, he couldn't understand what he was seeing. The mansion he had built to be a place of comfort and safety stood behind him, glowing warmly against the darkness. Yet the woman lying on the cold pavement was Grace Miller, the crippled maid who had worked inside that mansion for almost 2 years. The woman who had never once complained about her painful leg. The woman who had always insisted she could handle herself. Now she was soaked from head to toe, her walking cane lying several feet away, and her injured leg swollen so badly that Ethan could see the pain on her face from where he stood. Grace. Her eyes slowly opened. For a moment she thought she was dreaming. Then she recognized him. Mr. Sterling. Ethan rushed toward her. He dropped to his knees beside her. Grace, what happened? Grace immediately tried to sit up. I'm sorry. Ethan stared at her. Sorry. I couldn't finish the work. Ethan's expression changed. He looked at the rainwater running down her face. Then he looked at her swollen leg. What work? Grace shook her head. It's nothing. Grace. His voice became firmer. She looked away. I made a mistake. What mistake? Grace remained silent. Ethan's eyes slowly moved toward the mansion. The front doors were closed. He looked back at Grace. Who put you out here? Grace's lips trembled. She knew exactly who. But before she could answer, Ethan carefully slipped one arm beneath her shoulders and another beneath her legs. Grace gasped. Mr. Sterling, don't. Why? My leg. I know. I can walk. Ethan looked at the cane, lying several feet away. You're freezing. I'm fine. No, you're not. He lifted her. Grace instinctively wrapped her arms around his neck. The movement caused pain to shoot through her injured leg. She winced. Ethan noticed. His jaw tightened. How long have you been outside? Grace didn't answer. Grace, how long? A little while. How long? She swallowed. Almost 2 hours. Ethan's face went completely still. 2 hours. Someone had left her outside for nearly 2 hours in the middle of a violent storm. And she was trying to convince him it was nothing. Ethan carried her toward the mansion. That was when the front door suddenly opened. Victoria appeared. She was no longer holding her wine. Her expression had changed. For the first time that night, Ethan could see something close to fear in her eyes. Ethan. He stopped. Victoria stared at Grace in his arms. Then she looked at Ethan. I thought you weren't coming home until morning. I wasn't. His voice was cold. My meeting ended early. Victoria forced a smile. Well, this is unexpected. Ethan looked at her. Yes. He carried Grace inside. Victoria stepped backward. Ethan, wait. He didn't stop. I can explain. Ethan finally turned. Can you? Victoria's heart began pounding. She had spent the entire evening preparing for Ethan's absence. She had believed she had control of everything. She had never imagined he would return. And she certainly hadn't expected him to find Grace alive. Victoria glanced at Grace. The maid was still wrapped around Ethan's neck. Something dark flashed across Victoria's face. Ethan saw it. For the first time, a tiny crack appeared in the perfect image of his fiancée. What happened to her? He asked. Victoria immediately recovered. She disobeyed me. Grace lowered her eyes. Ethan stared at Victoria. Disobeyed you? Yes. What did she do? Victoria took a breath. She refused to finish her duties. Ethan looked at Grace. Is that true? Grace remained silent. Victoria immediately interrupted. She has been behaving strangely for weeks. Ethan's eyes narrowed. Strangely? Yes. Victoria stepped closer. I've tried to be patient with her, Ethan. You know I have. Grace looked at Victoria. She couldn't believe what she was hearing. Victoria continued. Tonight, I asked her to clean the terrace. Ethan looked at Grace's swollen leg. The terrace? Yes. In this weather? Victoria hesitated. It wasn't raining when I asked her. Ethan's eyes became colder. Then why was she outside for 2 hours? Victoria opened her mouth. No answer came. Ethan looked toward the security guards. Who ordered her outside? The guards immediately lowered their eyes. Victoria turned sharply. Nobody ordered her outside. Ethan's attention returned to Victoria. Then why was she outside? Victoria's voice became defensive. She went outside herself. Grace stared at her. That's not true. The words escaped before she could stop herself. The room became silent. Victoria slowly turned toward her. What did you say? Grace's heart raced. She had rarely challenged Victoria. But tonight she couldn't remain silent. You told them to put me outside. Victoria's face hardened. Be careful. Ethan looked between them. You told them. Victoria immediately shook her head. She is confused. Grace isn't confused. Ethan's voice was dangerously quiet. Victoria stared at him. Ethan had always been protective of people who couldn't defend themselves. Victoria knew that. That was why she had always made sure Ethan never saw the worst of her behavior. Whenever she insulted Grace, she did it privately. Whenever she punished her, she created an excuse. Whenever she made Grace cry, she ensured Ethan was somewhere else. She had carefully built a wall between Ethan and the truth. Tonight that wall had cracked. But Victoria wasn't ready to lose. She stepped closer to Ethan. Ethan, you have to understand. He said nothing. Grace has been manipulating you. Grace's eyes widened. Ethan slowly looked at Victoria. What? Victoria pointed toward Grace. She knows exactly what she's doing. Victoria. She knows you feel guilty about your brother. Ethan's expression suddenly changed. Grace became completely still. Victoria continued. She knows you're vulnerable. Stop. She uses that weakness to make you feel sorry for her. Victoria, I said stop. But Victoria was desperate now. She believed she had found the only explanation that could save her. Grace was manipulating Ethan. Grace was pretending to be helpless. Grace wanted Ethan's attention. Victoria had convinced herself of this story so completely that she no longer cared how cruel it sounded. You think she doesn't know what she's doing? Victoria asked. Look at her, she lets you carry her. She knows exactly how to make you feel guilty. Ethan looked down at Grace. Grace's eyes filled with tears. Mr. Sterling, I never. Ethan raised his hand. Not to silence her. To reassure her. Don't. Grace stopped. Ethan turned back to Victoria. Get the medical kit. Victoria stared at him. What? The medical kit. Ethan. Now. Victoria didn't move. Ethan's voice became harder. Victoria. She finally walked away. But as she disappeared into the hallway, her expression changed. She was furious. She had expected Ethan to become angry with Grace. Instead, he was protecting her. Victoria entered the private hallway and immediately pulled out her phone. She called someone. The person answered almost immediately. What happened? Victoria whispered. Ethan came home. Silence. Then the voice asked. Did he see her? Victoria closed her eyes. Yes. How much? Everything. The voice became tense. Then you need to control the situation. I know. Victoria's eyes moved toward the hallway. Ethan is already suspicious. Then make him believe the maid is unstable. Victoria's face changed. How? Didn't you say she has medication? Victoria stared into space. Then she understood. A slow smile appeared. Yes. Good. The voice continued. Make Ethan think Grace has become emotionally unstable. Tell him she is obsessed with him. Tell him she's imagining things. Victoria's smile widened. And the watch? Still in her room? Yes. Then you know what to do. The call ended. Victoria stood alone in the hallway. Her heart was beating rapidly. But she was no longer afraid. She had a plan. A very dangerous plan. And if it worked, Ethan would no longer see Grace as a victim. He would see her as a thief. A liar. A mentally unstable woman who had become obsessed with him. Victoria returned to the entrance carrying the medical kit. Ethan had placed Grace on a sofa. He was kneeling beside her. Where does it hurt? Grace pointed toward her leg. Ethan carefully examined the swelling. Victoria watched them. The way Ethan touched Grace's leg. The way he spoke to her. The concern in his eyes. Victoria felt something inside her burning. Jealousy. Pure and uncontrollable. Ethan had never looked at her that way. And suddenly, Victoria understood something. She didn't just want Grace gone. She wanted Grace destroyed. Ethan, Victoria said softly. He looked up. Yes. I think you need to know something. Grace's eyes immediately moved toward Victoria. Ethan noticed. What? Victoria took a breath. Then she looked at Grace. Perhaps you should tell him yourself. Grace's heart stopped. Ethan looked confused. Tell me what? Victoria's lips curved into a small smile. Ask her why she was in your private office yesterday. Grace's face went pale. Ethan slowly turned toward her. Grace. Grace couldn't speak. Victoria watched carefully. She knew exactly what she was doing. She had planted another seed of doubt. And this time, Grace had no idea how to remove it. Ethan's voice became quieter. Grace, why were you in my office? Grace looked down. I was cleaning. Victoria immediately interrupted. Cleaning. Grace nodded. Yes. Victoria laughed softly. Then, why did I find you standing beside Ethan's desk? Grace looked up. I told you I was cleaning. Ethan's eyes narrowed. Victoria moved closer. She was also looking through some papers. Grace's face changed. That's not true. Victoria looked at Ethan. See? Grace immediately realized what was happening. Victoria was setting a trap. But she couldn't prove it. Not yet. Ethan stood. Victoria, enough. Victoria looked surprised. You don't believe me. I didn't say that. Then what are you saying? I'm saying this isn't the time. Ethan turned toward Grace. You need to go to the hospital. Grace shook her head. No. Grace. I don't want to. Why? Grace looked at Victoria. Ethan followed her gaze. Victoria immediately understood. Grace was afraid of her. That realization should have made Ethan suspicious. Instead, Victoria quickly stepped between them. She's probably embarrassed. Ethan stared at her. Victoria smiled. She's been through a lot tonight. Ethan didn't respond. He lifted Grace again. I'm taking her to the hospital. Victoria's face tightened. Ethan. No. One word. Cold. Final. Victoria stood frozen. Ethan carried Grace toward the door. Then Grace suddenly whispered, Mr. Sterling. He stopped. Yes. Please don't. Ethan looked down. Don't what? Don't make this worse. His expression softened. Grace, you could have died. Grace closed her eyes. I know. Then why are you protecting her? Grace opened her eyes. Ethan froze. The question had come naturally. Victoria's face changed. Grace looked at Ethan. For 1 second, she almost told him everything. The photograph. The flash drive. Ryan's warning. The truth about the night he died. But she remembered Ryan's final words. Protect Ethan. And she knew that if she spoke tonight, Ethan could become the next target. So Grace lowered her eyes. I don't want to destroy your happiness. Ethan stared at her. Victoria felt a sudden chill. Because there was something in Grace's words. Something that didn't sound like a maid protecting her employer. It sounded like someone protecting Ethan from a danger he didn't even know existed. Ethan carried Grace outside. Victoria watched them leave. Then her eyes moved toward the security camera. She remembered the footage. Grace crawling in the rain. Ethan finding her. And suddenly, Victoria realized something. If Ethan had seen the security footage, everything was over. She immediately turned toward the security office. Where is the footage? The guard stared at her. What footage, ma'am? Victoria stepped closer. Don't play games with me. The guard swallowed. Mrs. Hayes, I don't. Don't call me that. Her voice became frighteningly calm. Not yet. The guard looked confused. Victoria leaned closer. The footage from tonight. The guard hesitated. I don't know what you're talking about. Victoria stared into his eyes. Then she smiled. That's fine. She turned away. But you will. As Victoria walked away, her phone buzzed again. This time it was a message. One sentence. The maid cannot be allowed to talk to ETHAN. Victoria stared at it. Then she slowly looked toward the mansion's front doors. Ethan was gone. Grace was with him. And for the first time, Victoria realized that the situation was no longer entirely under her control. But she still had one weapon. The stolen watch. She had hidden Ethan's expensive watch inside Grace's room earlier that evening. And before Ethan returned, she had planned to discover it. Now she knew exactly what she would do. She would turn Grace's suffering into evidence against her. She would make Ethan believe the woman he had just rescued was a thief. And if that failed, Victoria would find another way. Because Victoria Hayes had spent her entire life getting what she wanted. And she was not about to let a crippled maid stand between her and a billionaire husband. But as Victoria walked toward Grace's room, she failed to notice the security guard watching her. And she didn't know that the guard had already begun to suspect that something was terribly wrong. Most importantly, she didn't know that Ethan had not gone directly to the hospital. He had stopped his vehicle outside the mansion gates. Because Grace had asked him to. And inside the car, Ethan looked at her. Grace, I'm going to ask you one more time. Grace stared out the window. About what? Who put you outside? Grace remained silent. Ethan waited. Finally, Grace whispered. Victoria. Ethan's hands tightened around the steering wheel. The answer was finally out. And from that moment forward, everything was going to change. But Grace still had one final secret. A secret Ethan wouldn't discover until much later. Because the woman who had thrown Grace into the rain was not the only person who wanted her gone. Someone else had been watching Grace for years. Someone who knew exactly who she was. Someone connected to the death of Ryan Sterling. And that person was now terrified that Ethan had finally found her. Victoria stood alone in the hallway long after Ethan's vehicle disappeared beyond the gates. The mansion had suddenly become unnaturally quiet. Only minutes earlier, she had been standing behind the glass doors, watching Grace suffer in the rain. Now Ethan had taken Grace away. And for the first time since she entered the Sterling mansion, Victoria felt something she had almost forgotten how to feel. Fear. Not the fear of losing a man. Not even the fear of losing a wedding. This was different. She was afraid that Ethan might finally start asking questions. Questions about Grace. Questions about Ryan. Questions about the things Victoria's family had spent years hiding. Victoria's phone vibrated again. She looked at the screen. Marcus Hayes. Her father. She answered immediately. What? Marcus's voice came through the phone, tense and irritated. Where is the girl? Victoria's eyes narrowed. Grace. Don't say her name so loudly. Victoria glanced around the empty hallway. Why are you so interested in her? Because I told you to keep her away from Ethan. And now Ethan has taken her to the hospital. Silence. Victoria's grip tightened around the phone. Father. Marcus finally spoke. Did Ethan see her outside? Victoria closed her eyes. Yes. Did he see what happened? Yes. Another silence. This one was longer. Victoria could hear the change in her father's breathing. Marcus. What exactly did Ethan see? Victoria's voice became impatient. He saw her lying in the rain. He carried her inside. He asked me what happened. And what did you tell him? I told him she disobeyed me. You fool. Victoria's eyes widened. Excuse me. Did you tell him about the medicine? Victoria froze. No. Good. Why? Because if Ethan discovers that Grace was denied her medication, he will start asking questions about why you wanted her outside. Victoria's expression hardened. Then perhaps you should tell me why you're so terrified of a crippled maid. Marcus immediately became silent. Victoria smiled bitterly. That's what I thought. Victoria. No, I'm tired of being treated like a child. You told me to keep Grace away from Ethan, but you refused to tell me why. Because you don't need to know. She's a maid. Exactly. Marcus's voice suddenly became sharp. She's supposed to be invisible. Victoria stared at the wall. She's not invisible anymore. Marcus said nothing. Victoria's voice lowered. Who is Grace Miller? The silence on the other end became unbearable. Then Marcus said something that made Victoria's blood run cold. Someone who should have died 3 years ago. The call ended. Victoria remained completely still. For several seconds she couldn't breathe. 3 years. The same year Ryan Sterling died. The same year Grace's leg was destroyed. The same year Ethan's life fell apart. Victoria slowly lowered the phone. She had always believed Grace was simply a crippled woman who had somehow managed to find employment inside Ethan's mansion. But now, for the first time, Victoria wondered if Grace had deliberately entered Ethan's life. And if she had, why? Victoria's mind raced. Then her expression changed. A new thought entered her mind. Perhaps Grace wasn't trying to steal Ethan. Perhaps she was investigating him. Victoria immediately rejected the idea. It was ridiculous. Yet Marcus's fear had planted the seed. And Victoria knew something about seeds. If you planted them carefully enough, they could grow into something dangerous. She walked toward Grace's room. The mansion's staff quarters were located in a separate wing, far away from the luxurious bedrooms used by Ethan and Victoria. Grace's room was small, almost painfully small compared to the rest of the mansion. There was a narrow bed, a wooden wardrobe, a small desk, a bathroom, and one photograph beside the bed. Victoria entered without knocking. She looked around. Pathetic. She opened the wardrobe. Uniforms, shoes, a few personal belongings. Nothing valuable. Victoria opened a drawer. Nothing. Another. Nothing. Then she noticed the mattress. Her eyes narrowed. She lifted it. Nothing. Victoria became frustrated. She remembered something Grace had once said. Years ago, during one of Ethan's late-night conversations with her, Grace had mentioned that she kept her most important things somewhere Ethan would never look. Victoria hadn't thought much about it at the time. Now she wondered. She searched beneath the bed. Nothing. Then her eyes landed on an old wooden box. Victoria picked it up. Locked. Her pulse quickened. She searched the room until she found a small key hidden inside a book. The box opened. Inside was a photograph. Victoria picked it up. The moment she saw the young man standing beside Grace, her entire body went cold. It was Ryan Sterling, Ethan's dead brother. Victoria stared at the photograph. Ryan was smiling. Grace was standing beside him. They looked close. Very close. Victoria's breathing became shallow. Who are you? She turned the photograph over. There was writing on the back. Grace, if anything happens to me, keep your promise. Victoria stared at the words. Then she heard footsteps. She quickly placed everything back. The door opened. It was one of the housekeepers. Victoria turned. What are you doing here? The woman froze. I was looking for Grace. She's not here. The housekeeper looked at the open box. Victoria immediately closed it. Get out. The woman hurried away. Victoria waited until the hallway was empty. Then she took the photograph. She slipped it into her robe. She would deal with Grace later. For now, she had something far more important. Proof. Proof that Grace had known Ryan. And Victoria knew exactly how to use it. Meanwhile, across town, Ethan sat beside Grace in the emergency room. The doctors had already examined her. The news was not good. Her injured leg had suffered severe swelling. The cold exposure had also caused complications. One doctor explained that if Grace had remained outside much longer, she could have suffered permanent damage. Ethan listened in silence. He felt sick. He had spent years believing the Sterling mansion was a safe place. Yet someone had nearly allowed a woman to die on his property. A woman he had trusted. A woman who had never once asked him for anything. When the doctor left, Ethan returned to Grace's bedside. She was awake. How are you feeling? Grace looked at him. Better. That's not what the doctor said. Grace smiled weakly. You always were terrible at accepting simple answers. Ethan stared at her. For a moment, the old Grace returned. The quiet woman who had always teased him whenever he became too serious. Then Ethan remembered her lying in the rain. His smile disappeared. Grace. She looked at him. I need you to tell me the truth. Grace's face became tense. About what? Everything. Her heart sank. Ethan leaned closer. Who were you talking to on the phone earlier? Grace froze. What phone call? The one you received before the rain started. Grace looked away. Ethan had seen more than she realized. He had noticed her behavior earlier that evening. The mysterious call. The fear in her eyes. The photograph hidden in her room. He didn't know about those things yet, but he knew something wasn't right. Grace swallowed. It was nothing. Grace. I said it was nothing. Ethan's voice softened. Then why are you afraid? Grace looked at him. Because she couldn't tell him. Not yet. She remembered Ryan. The hospital corridor. The fear in his eyes. The warning. Don't trust everyone around my brother. Grace had spent 3 years keeping that promise. She couldn't break it now. Not even for Ethan. I don't want you to get hurt, she whispered. Ethan stared at her. Why would I get hurt? Grace's eyes filled with tears. Because some people are not who they appear to be. Ethan immediately thought of Victoria. But he didn't say her name. Instead, he asked, "Are you talking about Victoria?" Grace's heart stopped. She looked away. Ethan understood the silence. Grace, I can't. Can't what? I can't tell you. Why? Because if I tell you, you may hate me. Ethan frowned. Why would I hate you? Grace closed her eyes. Because I should have told you years ago. Ethan stared at her. Years ago. The word stayed with him. Grace, what happened 3 years ago? Grace's face went pale. Ethan noticed. He knew he had touched something important. But before he could continue, the hospital door opened. Daniel Brooks entered. Ethan's head turned. Daniel was Ethan's head of security. A former military officer with a reputation for being extremely observant, Daniel rarely spoke without a reason. He looked at Ethan. Then at Grace. Mr. Sterling. What is it? Daniel hesitated. I need to speak with you privately. Ethan stood. Grace immediately reached for his hand. Don't. Ethan looked at her. Grace's eyes were frightened. Daniel noticed. So did Ethan. I'll be back, Ethan said. Grace slowly released his hand. Ethan followed Daniel into the hallway. What happened? Daniel lowered his voice. I reviewed the security footage. Ethan's expression changed. From the mansion. Yes. Show me. Daniel hesitated. There's more. Ethan waited. Victoria ordered the guards to remove Grace from the mansion. Ethan's jaw tightened. I know. No, sir. Daniel looked directly at him. You don't know everything. He handed Ethan his phone. The footage began playing. Ethan watched Victoria standing behind the glass doors. He watched Grace begging. He watched Victoria refuse to open the door. Then he saw something else. The footage showed Victoria speaking to one of the guards. Ethan turned up the volume. Victoria's voice was clear. Take her cane. The guard looked uncomfortable. Ma'am, you heard me. Ethan's face hardened. The footage continued. Victoria pointed toward Grace. She doesn't deserve to be comfortable tonight. Ethan stopped the video. His hand tightened around the phone. Daniel watched him carefully. There's another recording. Ethan looked up. What? Audio. Daniel played it. Victoria's voice filled the hallway. Nobody opens that door. Then another voice. A guard. What if something happens to her? Victoria answered. Then you will tell everyone she was sick. Ethan closed his eyes. For a few seconds, he said nothing. Daniel had worked for Ethan long enough to know that this silence was dangerous. Ethan wasn't shouting. He wasn't screaming. He was becoming calm. Too calm. How long have you been collecting these? Daniel answered carefully. Some of them months. Ethan looked at him. Months. I noticed changes in Grace. What kind? Bruises. Ethan's eyes changed. Daniel continued. She always made excuses. Ethan remembered. The long sleeves Grace wore even during summer. The way she sometimes avoided stairs. The way she became nervous whenever Victoria entered a room. He had seen the signs. He simply hadn't understood them. And that realization hurt more than anything. Daniel lowered the phone. There's something else. Ethan looked at him. What? Grace isn't the only person Victoria has been targeting. Ethan's expression changed. Daniel handed him another file. Financial records. Transfers. Companies. Payments. Ethan stared at the documents. What am I looking at? Money moving from Sterling Global Holdings into accounts connected to Hayes Capital Partners. Ethan's eyes narrowed. How much? Daniel gave him the number. Ethan went completely still. Millions. Money had been disappearing for months. But the transfers were structured through shell companies. Someone had deliberately hidden them. Ethan looked at Daniel. Who authorized these? That's the problem. Daniel pointed to the documents. Your authorization code was used. Ethan stared. I didn't authorize anything. I know. The implications were enormous. Someone had access to Ethan's private financial systems. Someone close to him. Someone he trusted. Ethan looked toward Grace's hospital room. Then back at Daniel. Why didn't you tell me? Because I didn't have enough evidence. Daniel paused. And because I suspected someone inside the mansion was monitoring me. Ethan's eyes narrowed. Who? Daniel didn't answer immediately. Then he said, Victoria. Ethan's jaw tightened. Before he could respond, his phone rang. It was Victoria. Ethan stared at the screen. Daniel watched him. Are you going to answer? Ethan did. Hello. Victoria's voice immediately became soft. Ethan, darling, where are you? Why? I've been worried. Ethan looked at Daniel. Then at the hospital room. I'm with Grace. Victoria became silent. Only for a second. But Ethan noticed. Then she sighed. Oh. Yes. I just wanted to make sure you're okay. I'm fine. And Grace. Ethan's voice became cold. She's alive. Victoria swallowed. That's good. Ethan said nothing. Victoria continued. I've been thinking about tonight. So have I. There was another silence. Then Victoria said, I think you need to know something. Ethan's expression hardened. What? I found something in Grace's room. Ethan's eyes narrowed. What did you find? Victoria smiled on the other end. A watch. Ethan's heart stopped. His most expensive personal watch. The one he had last seen earlier that day. Victoria continued. I think you should come home. Ethan looked at Daniel. Daniel immediately understood. Victoria was setting the trap. Ethan's voice became dangerously calm. Why? Because I think Grace stole it. Ethan closed his eyes. For a moment, he saw Grace crawling through the rain. Then he remembered her words. I couldn't finish the work. Victoria had just given him the perfect reason to doubt her. But something didn't make sense. Ethan had seen Grace's room. She barely owned anything. And suddenly, he remembered something else. Victoria's obsession with controlling every detail. The security footage. The missing medication. The cane. The money. And now the watch. It was too perfect. Almost deliberately perfect. Ethan opened his eyes. Victoria. Yes. Don't touch anything in Grace's room. Victoria froze. Why? Because I'm coming home. Ethan ended the call. Daniel stared at him. What are you going to do? Ethan looked toward the hospital room. Then he said something Daniel had never heard him say before. Let her think she has one. Meanwhile, Victoria stood inside the mansion with Ethan's watch hidden inside Grace's room. She smiled. She believed the plan was working. But she didn't know Ethan had already begun to suspect her. And she certainly didn't know that Daniel had spent months collecting evidence against her. Most importantly, she didn't know that the photograph she had stolen from Grace's room was not the only thing Grace had hidden. Because beneath the loose wooden panel underneath Grace's bed was a small metal box. Inside that box was the one thing Victoria's family had spent 3 years trying to find. The flash drive. And Grace still had it. But as Grace lay in the hospital, she didn't know that Victoria had discovered the photograph. She didn't know Ethan was returning to the mansion. And she didn't know that the woman who had tried to destroy her had just made the biggest mistake of her life. Because Ethan was coming home. And this time, he wasn't coming home as Victoria's trusting fiancé. He was coming home as a man who had begun to suspect that the woman he intended to marry had been lying to him all along. The next morning, Victoria Hayes woke up believing she had finally regained control. She stood in front of the enormous mirror inside the master bedroom, carefully applying makeup while the city slowly came alive beyond the mansion's windows. From the outside, her life looked perfect. The future wife of a billionaire. A diamond engagement ring on her finger. A wedding being planned. A powerful family waiting to merge with the Sterling dynasty. Victoria had spent years building this life. She had learned how to smile beside Ethan at charity galas, how to hold his arm when cameras appeared, how to speak softly when he was grieving, and how to make his mother believe she was the perfect woman to join the Sterling family. But beneath the polished surface was a woman terrified of losing control. And this morning, that fear had turned into something darker. She opened the drawer beside her bed. Inside was the photograph she had stolen from Grace. Victoria removed it and stared at Ryan Sterling's face. 3 years earlier, Ryan had been alive. Brilliant, confident, and dangerously curious. Victoria remembered the first time Ryan had confronted her. It had been weeks before the accident. He had appeared outside her father's office unexpectedly. "You need to tell Ethan," Ryan had said. Victoria had stared at him. "Tell him what?" Ryan had stepped closer. "Don't pretend you don't know." She remembered the fear she had felt that day. Not because Ryan had proof, but because he was getting too close. Now, 3 years later, Grace had appeared with a photograph proving she and Ryan had been connected. Victoria looked at the words written on its back. "If anything happens to me, keep your promise." Her fingers tightened around the photograph. "What promise?" she whispered. A knock came at the door. Victoria quickly hid the photograph. "Come in." Her mother entered. "Victoria." Victoria turned. Her mother looked concerned. "Your father called." Victoria immediately became suspicious. "What did he say?" "He wants you to come home." "Why?" He wouldn't explain. Victoria's expression hardened. Of course he wouldn't. Her mother stepped closer. "Is something wrong?" Victoria almost laughed. Everything was wrong. But she couldn't tell her mother the truth. Instead, she said, "Nothing." Her mother looked at the engagement ring. Is Ethan still angry? Victoria's eyes flashed. He isn't angry. Then why did he leave last night? Victoria turned toward the mirror. Because of Grace. Her mother became silent. Then she asked, "That maid?" Victoria looked at her. Yes. Her mother frowned. Victoria, I thought you said she was harmless. So did I. The words came out quietly. Then Victoria looked at herself in the mirror again. Apparently, I was wrong. Across the city, Grace lay awake in a hospital bed. She hadn't slept. Every time she closed her eyes, she remembered the rain. The cold. Victoria's face behind the glass. But worse than the physical pain was the memory of Ethan carrying her. The way he had looked at her. The concern in his eyes. Grace had spent years protecting Ethan from a truth he deserved to know. Now she wondered if she had made a terrible mistake. She reached beneath her pillow. Her fingers touched something. The flash drive. Still there. Grace closed her eyes. A memory returned. 3 years earlier. Ryan had been sitting beside her in a hospital corridor. His breathing had been weak. His clothes were covered in blood. Grace had been crying. "Ryan, please tell me what's happening." Ryan had looked at her. "Ethan can't know." Grace shook her head. "He's your brother." That's why. Ryan had reached into his pocket. He had given her the small flash drive. "If they know I gave this to you, they'll come after you." Who? Ryan had looked toward the hospital doors. Then he whispered, "The people inside Ethan's company." Grace remembered staring at him. Why? Ryan had struggled to breathe. Because someone has been stealing from Sterling Global. Grace had felt her heart stop. Who? Ryan had never answered. He had only said, "Promise me you'll protect Ethan." The memory ended. Grace opened her eyes. 3 years. She had kept the flash drive hidden. She had never opened it. Because Ryan had told her not to. And then Grace had watched Ethan fall in love with Victoria. That was when her fear became unbearable. She had known Victoria's family was connected somehow. She just hadn't known how deeply. Now Ethan was beginning to suspect his fiancée. Grace knew the truth was coming. She simply didn't know when. At that exact moment, Ethan Sterling was standing in the hallway outside her hospital room. Daniel stood beside him. Ethan had spent the entire night reviewing the evidence. The security footage. The financial transfers. Victoria's lies. And the photograph of Ryan that Daniel had discovered through a staff member's report. Ethan still didn't know why Grace had been connected to Ryan. But he knew one thing. He had to ask her. Before he could enter, his phone rang. Victoria. Ethan stared at the screen. Then answered. Yes. Where are you? At the hospital. I know. Ethan's expression changed. How? Victoria paused. Then laughed softly. You're my fiancé, Ethan. I know where you are. Ethan said nothing. Victoria continued. I've been thinking about what happened last night. So have I. I don't want us to fight. We're not fighting. Then come home. Ethan's eyes narrowed. Why? Because I found the watch. There was a pause. Ethan knew exactly what watch she meant. Where? In Grace's room. Ethan's expression remained emotionless. Are you sure? I saw it myself. Don't touch it. Victoria immediately became defensive. Why are you acting like I planted it? I didn't say that. But that's what you're implying. Ethan looked through the glass window into Grace's room. Victoria, I want to see it myself. Of course. Her voice became sweet again. Come home. Ethan ended the call. Daniel looked at him. You don't believe her. Ethan shook his head. No. Why? Because if Grace stole the watch, why would she keep it in her room? Daniel thought for a moment. Unless she wanted to be caught. Ethan's eyes hardened. That's exactly what Victoria wants me to think. They returned to the mansion. Victoria was waiting. She had changed into an elegant cream-colored dress. Her hair was perfect. Her face was calm. Anyone watching them would have thought nothing terrible had happened. But Ethan saw her differently now. He saw every smile as a possible lie. Every gesture as a calculation. Victoria walked toward him. Ethan. She reached for his hand. He didn't take it. Her smile weakened. Are you still upset? Ethan looked at her. Where is the watch? Victoria pointed toward Grace's room. I didn't touch anything. Good. Ethan walked past her. Daniel followed. Victoria remained behind for a moment. Her heartbeat quickened. She had carefully placed the watch inside the top drawer of Grace's desk. She knew exactly where it was. And she knew exactly what Ethan would see. Ethan entered Grace's room. He looked around. The tiny room felt completely different from the mansion's luxurious master suite. Grace's life could fit into a few drawers. Her books were old. Her clothes were simple. There were no expensive bags. No jewelry. No luxury items. Ethan had never thought about how little Grace owned. Until now. He walked toward the desk. Opened the drawer. And there it was. His watch. Victoria stood in the doorway. I told you. Ethan didn't respond. He picked up the watch. He examined it. Then he looked at Grace's belongings. Victoria crossed her arms. I didn't want to believe it either. Ethan looked at her. What? That she could do something like this. Ethan's eyes narrowed. You sound disappointed. Victoria immediately changed her expression. Of course I'm disappointed. Why? Because I defended her. Ethan stared at her. Victoria sighed. I told you she was different. Ethan placed the watch on the desk. Did you search this room before? Victoria hesitated. No. Why not? Because I didn't want to invade her privacy. Ethan looked at the open drawer. Yet you knew exactly where it was. Victoria's face changed. Only slightly. But Ethan noticed. I didn't know exactly where it was. You said it was in Grace's room. Because I found it. Where? Victoria pointed. There. Ethan stared at the drawer. Did you open it? Yes. Why? Victoria became nervous. I was looking for something. What? She hesitated. Then she remembered the photograph. I was looking for evidence. Ethan's eyes narrowed. Evidence of what? Victoria's voice became soft. That Grace has been manipulating you. Ethan turned toward her. Enough. Victoria flinched. But then she looked hurt. Why are you defending her? I'm not. Then why won't you listen to me? Because you keep giving me reasons not to. The words struck her. Victoria stared at him. For a moment she looked genuinely wounded. Then her eyes filled with tears. Ethan, I love you. Ethan said nothing. I have spent years standing beside you. Still nothing. I was there when Ryan died. Ethan's expression changed. Victoria immediately knew she had touched his weakest point. I was there when you couldn't sleep. Her voice trembled. I was there when you couldn't even look at his bedroom. Ethan looked away. Victoria stepped closer. I stayed. She pointed toward Grace's room. And what did she do? Ethan turned. Victoria's tears began falling. She came into your life pretending to be helpless. Victoria. She knew exactly what she was doing. Stop. She knew you felt guilty about your brother. Ethan's face became hard. Victoria's voice dropped. Maybe that's why she got close to you. The room went silent. Ethan stared at her. Get out. Victoria froze. What? I said get out. Ethan. Leave this room. Victoria's face twisted with anger. But she quickly hid it. She walked out. Ethan remained inside. He stared at the watch. Something wasn't right. He picked it up. Then he noticed something. A tiny scratch. The watch had been damaged the previous week. He remembered taking it to a jeweler. The jeweler had replaced a small internal component. Ethan knew exactly where the scratch was. He examined it. The watch was his. There was no doubt. But that didn't prove Grace stole it. He looked at the drawer. Then he remembered something. Grace had never touched his personal belongings. Not once. She had cleaned his office for years. Yet she had never opened his desk. Never touched his wallet. Never moved his watch. Ethan slowly turned. Daniel was standing behind him. Check the security footage from the hallway, Ethan said. Daniel immediately pulled out his phone. They reviewed the recordings. At first, nothing. Then Daniel stopped. Wait. A figure appeared. Victoria. She was entering Grace's room. Ethan stared. What time? 2 hours before you arrived. Ethan's eyes hardened. She lied. Daniel nodded. She said she never entered. Ethan watched the footage. Victoria remained inside Grace's room for nearly 10 minutes. Then she left. Ethan didn't say anything. Daniel looked at him. Do you want me to search her room? Ethan shook his head. No. Why? Because I want to know what else she's hiding. Ethan turned toward the door. Then he heard a voice. Mr. Sterling. It was one of the housekeepers. Ethan stopped. The woman approached nervously. I need to tell you something. What? She looked toward Victoria's room. Miss Hayes told me to destroy some clothes. Ethan's expression changed. What clothes? Grace's. Why? She said they were damaged. Ethan's voice became cold. Did you destroy them? No. Where are they? The housekeeper pointed toward a storage room. Ethan walked there immediately. Inside, he found Grace's clothes. Several of them had stains. Not blood. Something else. Ethan recognized the smell. Cleaning chemicals. Strong ones. Daniel examined them. These weren't damaged. Ethan stared. They were deliberately ruined. The housekeeper began crying. Miss Hayes told us Grace was becoming difficult. Ethan's face became expressionless. How long has this been happening? The woman hesitated. Months. Ethan closed his eyes. Months. The truth was worse than he had imagined. He had been living in the same mansion, eating at the same table, sleeping under the same roof, while Grace had been suffering, and he hadn't noticed. Then Ethan remembered something. Grace had once asked him a strange question. It had been months earlier. They were standing near the staircase. Grace had looked at him and said, "Mr. Sterling, if you ever discovered someone you loved had been lying to you, would you want to know?" Ethan had laughed. "Of course." Grace had smiled sadly. "I hope you mean that." At the time, he hadn't understood. Now he did. And suddenly, he wanted answers. He turned toward Daniel. "Take me to the hospital." Daniel nodded. But before Ethan could leave, Victoria appeared at the end of the hallway. She had heard everything. She knew Ethan was going back to Grace. She knew the watch trap had failed. And she knew something worse. Ethan was beginning to investigate. Victoria looked at him. "Ethan." He stopped. She walked toward him. "What?" Victoria's face was calm. But inside she was panicking. "I want to apologize." Ethan stared at her. "For what?" "For Grace." He said nothing. Victoria lowered her head. "I was angry." "Why?" "Because I was jealous." Ethan's eyes narrowed. Victoria looked up. "I was jealous of the way you cared about her." Ethan remained silent. "I know how it sounds." "Yes. But it's the truth." Victoria stepped closer. "I thought you were falling in love with her." Ethan's expression changed. Victoria immediately saw the reaction. She had finally found the opening she wanted. "I was afraid of losing you." She reached for his hand. This time, Ethan didn't pull away immediately. Victoria felt hope. Then Ethan looked into her eyes. "Victoria." "Yes." "Have you ever loved me?" Her face changed. The question wasn't what she expected. "Of course." "Or did you love the idea of becoming Mrs. Sterling?" Victoria's heart stopped. Ethan released her hand. He walked away. Victoria stood there. For the first time, her carefully constructed world was beginning to collapse. But she wasn't finished. Not even close. Because she still had the photograph. And now she knew exactly how to use it. She pulled it from her robe. She stared at Grace standing beside Ryan. Then she smiled. "If you want the truth, Ethan," she whispered, "let's see how much truth you can handle." Victoria had no idea that Ethan was already beginning to uncover the truth himself. And she had no idea that Grace was about to reveal something that would change everything. Because when Ethan reached the hospital, Grace was no longer asleep. She was sitting upright, waiting for him. And beside her on the bed was the old photograph. The photograph Victoria thought she had stolen. Ethan stopped at the doorway. His eyes moved from Grace to the photograph. Then back to Grace. "Where did you get that?" Grace's face went pale. Ethan slowly walked into the room. "Grace." She closed her eyes. She knew the time had finally come. Ethan picked up the photograph. He stared at the young man beside her. Ryan. His dead brother. Then he looked at Grace. "Why are you standing beside my brother?" Grace couldn't answer. Ethan's voice became softer. "How did you know Ryan?" Grace's eyes filled with tears. And just as she finally opened her mouth to tell him the truth, her phone rang. Grace looked at the screen. Her face turned completely white. Ethan noticed. "Who is it?" Grace didn't answer. The number was unknown. But the message beneath it contained only 6 words. "He knows you have the drive. Run." Grace looked up at Ethan. And suddenly she understood. Someone knew the flash drive was still in her possession. Someone had been watching her. Someone knew Ethan was finally asking questions. And whoever that person was. They were terrified of what Grace might tell him next. Grace stared at the message on her phone. He knows you have the drive, run. Her fingers began to tremble. For 3 years she had lived with fear. But this was different. Someone knew. Someone knew about the flash drive. Someone knew she had kept it. And now someone knew Ethan was finally asking questions. Grace. Ethan's voice brought her back. She quickly locked the phone. Who sent that? Grace shook her head. I don't know. Ethan reached for the phone. Let me see. Grace pulled it away. Please. Grace. She looked into his eyes. I don't know who it is. Ethan could see she was terrified. Then why are you hiding it? I'm not. You just hid your phone from me. Grace looked away. Ethan became frustrated. Grace, I'm trying to protect you. Her eyes filled with tears. That's exactly what I'm afraid of. Ethan froze. What does that mean? Grace couldn't answer. She wanted to tell him everything. She wanted to tell him about Ryan. About the flash drive. About the secrets. About the people she believed were responsible for the accident. But she couldn't. Not yet. Because Ryan's warning still lived inside her. If they know I gave this to you, they'll come after you. Ethan sat beside her. Grace, I need you to trust me. Grace looked at him. I do. Then tell me. I can't. Why? Grace's voice broke. Because I don't know who I can trust anymore. Ethan stared at her. Those words confirmed what he had suspected. Grace wasn't simply afraid of Victoria. She was afraid of someone else. Someone powerful. Someone capable of hurting her. Before Ethan could ask another question, the hospital door suddenly opened. Daniel entered. Mr. Sterling. Ethan turned. What happened? Daniel's face was serious. We need to leave. Why? Now. Grace immediately became frightened. Daniel looked toward the hallway. I found something. Ethan stood. What? Daniel lowered his voice. Someone has been accessing Grace's hospital records. Ethan's expression changed. Who? We don't know. Daniel handed him a tablet. The access logs showed repeated attempts to view Grace's medical records. Some had been made from computers inside the hospital. Others had been made remotely. Ethan looked at Grace. How did they know she was here? Daniel shook his head. That's what we're trying to find out. Grace's face went pale. Ethan immediately understood. They were no longer dealing with Victoria's cruelty alone. Someone was actively searching for Grace. Ethan turned to Daniel. Get her out of here. Grace stared at him. Where? Somewhere safe. No. Ethan looked at her. Grace. I can't leave. Why? She looked toward the window. Because if I leave, whoever is watching will know we're afraid. Daniel exchanged a glance with Ethan. Grace had just revealed something important. She wasn't helpless. She was scared. But she was thinking. And Ethan suddenly realized something he had never considered. Grace had survived 3 years with a secret that powerful. She had survived losing her leg. She had survived working in the mansion. She had survived Victoria. Perhaps the crippled maid was far stronger than anyone knew. Ethan sat beside her again. Tell me about Ryan. Grace closed her eyes. The room became silent. Finally, she whispered, Ryan was my friend. Ethan's heart stopped. My brother. Grace nodded. How? We met before I started working for you. When? About 6 months before the accident. Ethan stared at her. Why didn't you tell me? Because Ryan asked me not to. Why? Grace looked down. Because he was investigating something. Ethan's expression hardened. What? Grace hesitated. Money. Ethan's eyes narrowed. What money? Grace looked toward the door. Then she whispered. Money being stolen from Sterling Global. Ethan went completely still. Daniel's expression changed. How much? Grace shook her head. I don't know. Who was stealing it? I don't know. Ethan stood. Grace, you're telling me my brother was investigating financial theft inside my company, and you kept that from me for 3 years. Grace's tears began falling. Ryan made me promise. He was my brother. I know. Grace's voice broke. He was my friend too. The room went silent. Grace wiped her tears. Ryan knew something was wrong. What? He said people inside your company were moving money through other companies. Ethan immediately remembered the documents Daniel had shown him. Shell companies. Hidden transfers. Millions missing. His heart began pounding. Did Ryan know who was responsible? Grace shook her head. Not completely. Then what did he know? He said he was close. Ethan looked at Daniel. Daniel understood. Ryan had been investigating the same financial network they had just discovered. Ethan turned back to Grace. What happened next? Grace looked down. He was killed. Ethan's face changed. The room became unbearably quiet. Grace continued. 3 days before the accident, Ryan told me he was afraid. Ethan's hands tightened. Afraid of who? I don't know. Grace. I don't know. She was crying now. He wouldn't tell me. Ethan looked away. He remembered Ryan's last phone call. His brother had called him that night. Ethan had been busy. He hadn't answered. Ryan had left a voicemail. Ethan had never listened to it. He had deleted it months later, because hearing Ryan's voice had been too painful. Now he wondered, what had Ryan been trying to tell him? Ethan turned toward Daniel. Find that voicemail. Daniel stared at him. Sorry. The old backup. I'll try. Don't try. Ethan's voice became firm. Find it. Daniel nodded. Yes, sir. Suddenly, Grace's phone rang again. She looked at the screen. Unknown number. This time, Ethan saw it. Answer it. Grace shook her head. Don't. Ethan stared at her. Why? Because they want to know where I am. Ethan's eyes narrowed. Then let them. He took the phone. Hello. Silence. Ethan waited. Then a distorted voice spoke. You're asking questions you shouldn't ask. Ethan's expression changed. Who is this? The voice laughed. Ask the crippled girl what happened the night your brother died. Ethan froze. Grace's face went white. The caller continued. Ask her why she was there. Then the line went dead. Ethan slowly lowered the phone. He looked at Grace. You were there. Grace couldn't speak. Grace. She began shaking. I didn't kill Ryan. Ethan's expression changed. I didn't say you did. He was already dying when I found him. Ethan stared. What? Grace closed her eyes. The truth she had buried for 3 years was finally beginning to surface. I found him after the accident. Ethan's voice became barely audible. You were there. Grace nodded. Yes. Why didn't you tell me? Because Ryan told me not to. Why? Because he was afraid. Of what? Grace looked at Ethan. Of the person who caused the accident. The room went silent. Ethan's breathing became heavy. You're saying Ryan's death wasn't an accident? Grace looked away. I don't know. But you think it was. I think someone wanted him dead. Ethan stepped backward. His entire world seemed to shift. For 3 years he had blamed himself. He had believed his brother died because he had failed to control the vehicle. He had carried the guilt. He had punished himself. And now Grace was telling him that Ryan might have been murdered. Did Ryan say anything? Grace hesitated. Before he died, he gave me something. Ethan looked at her. What? Grace's hand moved toward her pillow. Then she stopped. The flash drive. She couldn't give it to him. Not yet. Because she didn't know if Ethan was safe. And she didn't know if the hospital was safe. But Ethan saw the movement. What is it? Grace stared at him. Nothing. Ethan's expression hardened. Grace. She looked away. I can't. Can't what? Give it to you. What? Not yet. Ethan stared at her. What did Ryan give you? Grace remained silent. Ethan's voice became cold. Grace, I am your employer. She flinched. Yes. And I am the brother of the man you're talking about. I know. Then why won't you trust me? Grace looked directly into his eyes. Because I don't know if you're safe. Ethan froze. Daniel immediately looked toward the door. The meaning was clear. Someone close to Ethan could be involved. And Grace didn't know who. Meanwhile, back at the Sterling mansion, Victoria was standing inside Ethan's office. She had entered using a key Ethan had given her months earlier. The office was heavily secured, but Victoria knew the access code. She had watched Ethan enter it countless times. She opened a hidden compartment. Inside was a file. Ryan Sterling, Private Investigation. Victoria's hands began trembling. Ethan had reopened the investigation. She flipped through the pages. Financial transfers. Company names. Names of executives. And one photograph. Ryan standing beside a woman. Grace. Victoria's breathing stopped. Then she saw another photograph. Grace entering a hospital. 3 years earlier. The same night Ryan died. Victoria suddenly understood. Grace hadn't randomly appeared in Ethan's mansion. She had been there because of Ryan. And if Ethan discovered that, everything would collapse. Victoria quickly took pictures of the documents. Then she heard footsteps. She froze. The office door opened. Ethan's mother, Billionaire Sterling, stood there. Victoria turned. Mrs. Sterling. Billionaire looked suspicious. What are you doing in Ethan's office? Victoria smiled. I was looking for him. He's not here. I know. Billionaire's eyes moved toward the open file. What is that? Victoria immediately closed it. Nothing. Billionaire stepped closer. Victoria. The older woman had always treated Grace coldly. She believed Grace was merely a servant. But even Billionaire had begun noticing the tension inside the mansion. She had noticed Grace's bruises. She had noticed Victoria's sudden anger. She had noticed how Grace became frightened whenever Victoria entered a room. And now she was beginning to suspect that something was terribly wrong. Victoria smiled. I think you should ask Ethan. Elena frowned. About what? Victoria leaned closer. About Grace. Elena's expression changed. What about her? Ask him why she knew Ryan. Elena froze. Victoria smiled. Then she walked away. She had just planted another seed. And Victoria knew exactly what she was doing. She wasn't simply trying to destroy Grace. She was slowly turning the people around Ethan against her. By the time Ethan discovered the truth, Victoria wanted everyone to believe that Grace was the real danger. But Victoria had made one mistake. She had underestimated Elena. Because after Victoria left, Elena walked into Ethan's office. She opened the file. She saw the photographs. Then she saw something that made her heart stop. A handwritten note from Ryan. If I die, find Grace Miller, she knows the truth. Elena stared at the words. Her entire understanding of the past 3 years began to crumble. And suddenly, she remembered something. The night of Ryan's accident. Grace had appeared at the hospital. Elena had seen her. But someone had ordered security to remove her. At the time, Elena had assumed Grace was a stranger. Now she realized. Grace had been there for Ryan. Elena picked up her phone. She called Ethan. But Ethan didn't answer. She tried again. Still nothing. Then her eyes fell on the note. And for the first time in 3 years, Elena wondered whether her son had been living with a lie. Meanwhile, inside the hospital room, Ethan was still staring at Grace. Show me the flash drive. Grace's eyes filled with tears. Not here. Why? Because someone is watching us. Daniel immediately stepped toward the door. Ethan lowered his voice. Where is it? Grace whispered. Somewhere Victoria will never find it. Ethan's expression changed. Victoria. Grace immediately realized her mistake. Ethan stepped closer. What does Victoria have to do with this? Grace shook her head. Nothing. Grace. Please. Ethan stared at her. Then his phone rang. It was Elena. He answered. Mom. Her voice was trembling. Ethan, you need to come home. Why? I found something in your office. What? Something about Ryan. Ethan's entire body went still. Elena continued. I think you need to know the truth. The call ended. Ethan looked at Grace. She immediately knew. The secret was no longer safe. Ethan walked toward the door. Grace. She looked at him. I'm coming back. Where are you going? Home. Grace grabbed his hand. Ethan. He stopped. Don't trust anyone. Ethan stared at her. Then he slowly nodded. I won't. He left. Grace watched him disappear. For the first time, she felt a strange mixture of relief and terror. She had spent 3 years trying to protect Ethan. Now Ethan was finally searching for the truth. But the closer he got to it, the more dangerous everything became. And somewhere inside the mansion, Victoria was preparing her next move. She had already stolen the photograph. She had framed Grace with Ethan's watch. She had planted suspicion inside Ethan's mind. Now she needed to make sure Grace never had the chance to tell Ethan everything. Victoria picked up her phone. She called Marcus. Father. His voice was tense. What happened? Ethan knows about Grace and Ryan. Marcus went silent. Then Victoria said, and he knows about the flash drive. There was a long pause. When Marcus finally spoke, his voice had changed. Then Grace must disappear. Victoria stared into the darkness outside her window. "How?" Marcus answered. "Make it look like she left." Victoria's eyes narrowed. "And Ethan? By the time he finds out, it will be too late." Victoria smiled. But neither of them knew that Daniel was standing outside the mansion's security office, reviewing the camera feeds. And on one of those recordings, he saw something that changed everything. A black vehicle had been parked near the Sterling estate for 3 consecutive nights. The same vehicle. The same unknown driver. And on the night Grace was thrown outside in the rain, the vehicle had been there too. Daniel zoomed in. The image was blurry, but there was one detail he could clearly see. A small golden symbol on the driver's hand. The same symbol he had seen on Marcus Hayes's cufflinks. Daniel's face became grim. He immediately picked up the phone. He called Ethan, but Ethan didn't answer. Then Daniel called again. Still nothing. Finally, Daniel whispered, "Mr. Sterling, you need to come home." Because the truth Ethan had spent 3 years searching for was no longer buried. It was coming for him. And Victoria had no idea that her attempt to destroy Grace had just brought Ethan closer than ever to discovering exactly what happened to Ryan. But before Ethan could reach the mansion, Grace received one final message. Her phone vibrated. She looked down. This time there were only 4 words. "He's coming for you." Grace slowly raised her head. Someone was standing outside her hospital window. Watching. Waiting. And when Grace looked again, the figure was gone. The moment Grace realized the figure outside her hospital window had disappeared, every instinct in her body told her to stay silent. She didn't scream. She didn't call the nurse. She didn't even move toward the window. She simply sat there, staring at the darkness. Someone had been watching her, and whoever it was knew about the flash drive. Grace slowly reached beneath her pillow. The small metal object was still there. For 3 years she had protected it. Now she understood that keeping it hidden might no longer be enough. She needed to move. But where? She looked toward the door. Ethan had promised he would return. That was the problem. Grace knew Ethan. If he discovered she was in danger, he would come straight back. And if someone was watching her, that would put him in danger too. Her phone vibrated. Grace jumped. Another message. "You have 10 minutes." Her blood ran cold. Then another message arrived. "Leave the drive." Grace stared at the screen. A third message appeared. "Or Ethan dies next." Grace stopped breathing. For 3 years, she had protected Ethan because Ryan had asked her to. Now the same people who had taken Ryan from him were threatening to take Ethan too. Grace slowly stood. Pain shot through her injured leg. She gripped the bed. The hospital room suddenly felt like a prison. She reached for her walking cane. Then she remembered something. The hospital staff had said her room was secure. But Daniel had already discovered someone was accessing her medical records. That meant someone had access to the hospital system. Someone knew exactly where she was. Grace looked at the door. She couldn't stay, but she couldn't leave through the main entrance either. She needed another way. Her eyes moved toward the emergency exit map on the wall. A plan began forming. It was dangerous, but she had no choice. Grace took the flash drive from beneath her pillow. She placed it inside the lining of her jacket. Then she picked up her cane. The pain in her leg was severe, but she forced herself forward. One step, then another. She reached the door. She opened it slowly. The hallway was empty. Grace stepped outside. At the far end, a nurse was pushing a medical cart. Grace waited until the nurse turned. Then she moved in the opposite direction. She reached the service corridor. The lights flickered. Grace's heart raced. Then she heard footsteps. Someone was coming. She turned. A man appeared at the end of the corridor. Grace froze. The man stopped. For several seconds, neither moved. Then he smiled. Grace recognized him. He was one of Marcus Hayes's private security men. The same man she had seen outside the hospital 3 years ago. The same man who had been standing near Ryan's room on the night he died. Grace's blood turned to ice. He took one step toward her. Grace turned and ran. Her injured leg screamed with pain. She nearly fell. But she kept moving. Behind her, the man's footsteps became faster. Grace reached the emergency exit. She pushed the door open. Cold air hit her face. She stumbled outside. The man followed. Grace looked around. A delivery van was parked nearby. She ducked behind it. The man stepped outside. Grace. She covered her mouth. He looked around. Nothing. Grace waited. The man finally walked away. She didn't move. She stayed hidden until she was certain he was gone. Then she looked toward the street. A taxi was passing. Grace stepped out. Stop. The taxi stopped. Grace opened the door. Where to? Anywhere. The driver looked confused. Grace climbed inside. Just drive. The taxi pulled away. Grace looked through the rear window. The man had returned. He was standing outside the hospital, watching her leave. Then he lifted his phone. Grace's phone immediately vibrated. She looked down. Bad choice. Grace closed her eyes. She knew she had been seen. But she had one advantage. They didn't know where she was going. At least she hoped they didn't. Meanwhile, Ethan was speeding toward the Sterling mansion. Daniel sat beside him. How long until we get there? 10 minutes. Ethan's phone rang. He answered. Yes. It was Eleanor. Ethan, where are you? On my way home. Don't come through the front gate. Ethan frowned. Why? I saw someone outside. Who? I don't know. Ethan immediately looked at Daniel. Where? Near the east entrance. Mom, go upstairs. I'm already there. Lock the door. Ethan. Do it now. He ended the call. Daniel looked at him. What happened? Someone is at the mansion. Daniel immediately called the security team. Check the east entrance. A few seconds later, a guard answered. Nothing here. Daniel frowned. Check the cameras. The guard went silent. Then he said, Sir, the cameras are down. Ethan's expression changed. All of them. Yes. Daniel immediately reached for his weapon. Ethan looked at him. What? We have a problem. The vehicle accelerated. 10 minutes later, Ethan arrived at the mansion. The gates opened. He drove inside. The property looked completely normal. Too normal. Ethan stepped out. Daniel immediately moved ahead. Stay behind me. Ethan ignored him. He walked toward the mansion. The front doors opened. Eleanor rushed toward him. Ethan, are you okay? She nodded. Yes. Where is Victoria? Eleanor's expression changed. Upstairs. Ethan looked at Daniel. then at his mother. What did you find? Eleanor led him into the office. She placed Ryan's note on the desk. Ethan picked it up. His hands began trembling. He recognized Ryan's handwriting immediately. If I die, find Grace Miller. She knows the truth. Ethan looked at his mother. Where did you find this? In your private file. Ethan's eyes narrowed. How did you get into my office? Victoria was already here. Ethan's expression changed. Victoria. Yes. She was looking through your files. Ethan stared at the note. Then he looked toward the door. Where is she? Eleanor pointed upstairs. Ethan walked away. Daniel followed. Victoria was standing in the master bedroom. She had heard them enter. She knew something had changed. Ethan opened the door. Victoria turned. Ethan. He stared at her. Where is Grace? Victoria immediately became confused. I don't know. Why? Why would I know? Because she left the hospital. Victoria's eyes widened. What? Ethan watched her carefully. Grace is missing. Victoria immediately raised her hands. I had nothing to do with that. Ethan's eyes narrowed. I didn't accuse you. Victoria realized her mistake. She quickly changed her expression. I'm just worried. Are you? Of course. Ethan stepped closer. Then why did you lie to me? Victoria froze. About what? Going into Grace's room. Victoria's face changed. I already explained. No. Ethan's voice became cold. You didn't. Victoria took a step backward. I was looking for evidence. Evidence of what? That she was stealing from you. You planted my watch. Victoria's eyes widened. How dare you? Ethan didn't react. I know you entered her room. I did. I know you placed the watch there. I didn't. Daniel stepped forward. We have the footage. Victoria looked at him. Her face turned pale. Ethan continued. How long have you been hurting Grace? Victoria's expression changed. Excuse me. You heard me. I have never hurt her. Ethan laughed bitterly. Then explain the clothes. What clothes? The clothes you ordered destroyed. Victoria's heart stopped. Ethan stared at her. How long? Victoria began crying. I don't know what you're talking about. How long? I didn't do anything. Ethan's voice suddenly exploded. Stop lying to me. The mansion fell silent. Victoria stared at him. Ethan had never shouted at her like that. For the first time, she saw something in his eyes that frightened her. Disgust. Not anger. Disgust. Victoria's tears continued. Ethan, please. Don't. I love you. Don't say that. She froze. Ethan turned away. Victoria stared at his back. Then something inside her snapped. She stopped crying. Her face became cold. Fine. Ethan turned. Victoria wiped her tears. You want the truth? Yes. Then ask Grace. Ethan's eyes narrowed. About what? Ask her why she was with Ryan the night he died. Silence. Ethan froze. Victoria smiled. Ask her what she was doing at the hospital. Ethan stared at her. Victoria continued. Ask her why she disappeared after his death. Ethan's voice became low. How do you know this? Victoria's smile disappeared. I know everything. Ethan stepped closer. How? Victoria realized she had gone too far. But she couldn't stop now. I know Grace isn't who she says she is. Who is she? Victoria looked at him. Someone who has been lying to you for years. Ethan stared at her. Where is the photograph? Victoria's face changed. What photograph? The one you stole from Grace. Victoria froze. Ethan knew. She had no idea how. But he knew. Daniel stepped forward. Give it to him. Victoria's hands trembled. Slowly she reached into her robe. She removed the photograph. Ethan took it. He stared at Ryan. Then at Grace. Then at the words written behind it. His face changed. What promise? Victoria said nothing. Ethan looked at her. What promise did Ryan ask her to keep? Victoria remained silent. Ethan's anger returned. Answer me. I don't know. You're lying. I don't know. Ethan threw the photograph onto the desk. Then why did you steal it? Victoria stared at him. Because I was afraid. Of Grace. No. Victoria looked at him. Of what she knows. Ethan's blood ran cold. Knows what? Victoria didn't answer. Ethan stepped closer. Victoria. She looked away. Then her phone rang. Everyone froze. Victoria looked at the screen. Marcus. She didn't answer. The phone rang again. Ethan saw the name. Who is Marcus Hayes? Victoria's face went pale. My father. Why is he calling you now? I don't know. Ethan stared at her. Answer it. Victoria hesitated. Answer it. She answered. Hello. Marcus spoke. His voice was barely audible. Where is Grace? Victoria looked at Ethan. She's gone. What? She left the hospital. Marcus became furious. You idiot. Victoria's face changed. What? You were supposed to keep her there. Ethan's eyes narrowed. Victoria realized the mistake. Marcus continued. Do you understand what will happen if she reaches Ethan? The call went silent. Victoria slowly looked at Ethan. He had heard everything. Ethan's face was expressionless. Put him on speaker. Victoria didn't move. Put him on speaker. No. Ethan took the phone. Marcus's voice came through. Victoria. Ethan spoke. Hello, Marcus. Silence. Ethan smiled coldly. I think we need to talk. The line went dead. Ethan stared at the phone. Then he looked at Victoria. You're going to tell me everything. Victoria began shaking. But before she could answer, Daniel's phone rang. He listened. His face changed. Then he looked at Ethan. Sir? What? We found Grace. Ethan's heart jumped. Where? Daniel hesitated. Her taxi was found abandoned. Ethan's expression changed. Where? About 20 miles from here. Is she inside? No. Then where is she? Daniel's voice became grim. We found her cane. Ethan went completely still. The cane was lying beside the abandoned taxi. There was blood on it. Ethan's face turned white. No. Daniel continued. There's something else. What? A note. He handed it to Ethan. Ethan opened it. 3 words. She's ours now. Ethan's hands began trembling. Victoria stared at the note. For the first time, she looked genuinely terrified. Because she knew exactly what those words meant. Ethan turned toward her. You know who did this? Victoria shook her head. No. You're lying. I swear. Ethan grabbed her arm. Where is Grace? Victoria screamed. I don't know. Daniel stepped forward. Sir. Ethan released her. Victoria collapsed against the wall. And for the first time, Ethan saw genuine fear on her face. Not acting. Not manipulation. Real fear. Then Victoria whispered something that made Ethan's entire body go cold. She's not the one they're after. Ethan stared at her. What? Victoria looked at him. They don't want Grace. Ethan's voice became barely audible. Then who do they want? Victoria swallowed. You. Silence. Ethan stared at her. Victoria continued. Grace knows where the evidence is. What evidence? The evidence Ryan was carrying. Ethan's heart stopped. What evidence? Victoria looked toward the floor. The evidence that can destroy my father. Ethan stared. Then everything suddenly connected. The stolen money. The shell companies. Ryan's investigation. Grace's fear. Victoria's obsession with controlling Grace. The flash drive. Ethan's voice became cold. Your father killed Ryan. Victoria's eyes widened. No. Did he? I don't know. You're lying. I don't know. Ethan stepped back. Victoria was crying now. I swear, Ethan, I don't know if my father killed Ryan. Then what do you know? Victoria looked at him. And finally, she said the words that would change everything. Ryan wasn't supposed to die. Ethan froze. Victoria continued. The accident was supposed to scare him. Ethan's face became empty. What accident? Victoria closed her eyes. My father ordered someone to stop Ryan. Ethan stared. Stop him from doing what? From giving the evidence to you. The room went silent. Ethan felt the world disappear around him. Ryan hadn't died because of an accident. He had died because someone wanted to stop him. And Grace had been there. She had seen what happened. She had the evidence. And now, she was missing. Ethan looked at Daniel. Find her. We will. Find her now. Daniel nodded. Ethan turned toward Victoria. His voice was dangerously calm. If Grace dies. Victoria looked at him. Ethan's eyes were filled with rage. Your life will be over. Victoria began crying. But Ethan walked away. He didn't know where Grace was. He didn't know who had taken her. He didn't know whether she was alive. But one thing was certain. The woman he had once planned to marry had been hiding a horrifying truth. And somewhere in the darkness, Grace was fighting for her life. But what Ethan didn't know was that Grace had not been kidnapped. Not yet. She had escaped from the men who were following her. The abandoned taxi was part of a plan. And the blood on her cane wasn't hers. Grace had deliberately left it behind. Because she knew whoever was hunting her would follow the evidence. She was hiding in an abandoned roadside church. Alone. Terrified. But alive. She pulled the flash drive from her jacket. Then she heard footsteps outside. Grace held her breath. The door slowly opened. A man entered. Grace recognized him immediately. Marcus Hayes' security chief. But he wasn't alone. Behind him stood someone Grace never expected to see. Someone she believed had died 3 years ago. Grace's eyes widened. The man stepped into the light. And Grace whispered one name. Ryan. Grace couldn't breathe. The man standing inside the abandoned church looked exactly like Ryan Sterling. Same height. Same dark eyes. Same scar above his left eyebrow. The same voice when he finally spoke. Grace. Her hand flew to her mouth. The flash drive nearly slipped from her fingers. No. The man took one step forward. Grace immediately stepped backward. Stay away from me. Grace, listen. No. Her voice echoed through the empty church. She gripped her cane tightly. You died. The man stopped. For a moment, he simply stared at her. Then he slowly removed the baseball cap covering his head. Grace stared. The resemblance was terrifying. But something was wrong. Ryan had a small birthmark beneath his right eye. This man didn't. Grace noticed it immediately. Her fear changed into suspicion. You're not Ryan. The man's expression changed. No. Who are you? He took a breath. My name is Nathan Sterling. Grace's eyes widened. The name meant nothing to her. But the man's next words nearly brought her to her knees. Ryan was my identical twin. Grace stared at him. Ryan never told me he had a twin. He didn't tell many people. Why? Nathan looked toward the church doors. Because my existence was dangerous. Grace couldn't move. For 3 years, she had believed Ryan was an only child. She had known Ethan. She had known Ryan. But no one had ever mentioned Nathan. Nathan stepped closer. Ryan wanted to tell you. When? Before he died. Grace's eyes filled with tears. Then why didn't he? Nathan looked at her. Because he knew someone was watching him. Grace's heart began racing. Nathan continued. My brother discovered that someone inside Sterling Global was stealing money. Grace stared. You knew. I knew he was investigating. Who? Nathan shook his head. I don't know. Grace didn't believe him. You're lying. I'm not. You expect me to believe that after 3 years. Nathan's expression hardened. I watched my brother die. Grace froze. Nathan looked away. I was there that night. The word struck her. You were there. Yes. Grace's breathing became shallow. Where? On the road. Then why didn't you help him? Nathan's face twisted with pain. I tried. He closed his eyes. I got there before you. Grace stared. What? Nathan looked at her. Ryan wasn't dead when I found him. Grace remembered that night. The wrecked vehicle. The blood. Ryan's weak breathing. The way he had struggled to speak. She had believed she arrived first. But Nathan was saying otherwise. What happened? Nathan swallowed. I pulled him out of the vehicle. Grace's eyes widened. Then why was he still inside when I arrived? Nathan looked at her. Because someone came. Grace felt cold. Who? I don't know. You must have seen them. It was dark. Then how do you know someone came? Nathan looked toward the church doors. Because I heard them. Grace's heart pounded. What did you hear? 2 men. She waited. They were looking for something. Grace immediately thought of the flash drive. What? I don't know. Nathan's eyes moved toward her jacket. But I think you do. Grace instinctively covered the flash drive. Nathan noticed. Ryan gave you something. Grace said nothing. Nathan nodded. The drive. Grace took a step backward. How do you know? Because Ryan told me. Grace stared. Before he died. Yes. What did he say? Nathan's face became grim. He told me he had given the evidence to someone he trusted. Grace whispered. Me. Nathan nodded. Yes. Grace's knees weakened. She sat down on the nearest wooden bench. Why did he trust me? Because you saved his life. Grace looked up. Nathan continued. 3 years ago, before the accident, Ryan was being followed. Grace remembered. The late-night calls. The strange cars. The fear in Ryan's eyes. She had thought he was simply under pressure. Nathan's voice softened. You were the only person who helped him without asking questions. Grace looked down. I loved him. Nathan stopped. Grace quickly corrected herself. Not like that. I know. He was my friend. I know. He was like a brother to me. Nathan's eyes filled with emotion. That's why he trusted you. Grace looked at him. Then why did you stay hidden? Nathan's expression changed. Because I was supposed to be dead. Grace froze. What? Nathan sat across from her. 3 years ago, someone discovered Ryan had a twin. He paused. That person believed I was the one investigating the company. Grace's face changed. They wanted to kill you. They tried. Nathan touched the scar near his neck. I survived. Grace stared. Then why didn't you go to Ethan? Nathan laughed bitterly. Because Ethan was being watched. Grace's heart stopped. By who? Nathan looked directly at her. Your employer. Grace's blood ran cold. Ethan. No. Nathan shook his head. Someone inside his company. Grace's thoughts raced. The financial theft. The shell companies. The security breaches. The missing money. Everything connected. Then Nathan said something that made Grace's stomach turn. Victoria knows. Grace stared at him. What? Victoria knows about the operation. Grace's eyes widened. She knows about the theft. Yes. Then she knows who killed Ryan. Nathan shook his head. Not exactly. Then what does she know? Nathan hesitated. Her father was involved. Grace's heart sank. Marcus Hayes. The name finally had meaning. She had always suspected Victoria's family was connected. Now she understood why Victoria had been so desperate to control her. Nathan continued. Marcus was not the mastermind. Grace stared. Who was? Nathan looked at her. I don't know. Then how can you be sure? Because Marcus reported to someone else. Grace's face became pale. Who? Nathan shook his head. I never found out. The church fell silent. Then Grace remembered the message. He knows you have the drive. She looked at Nathan. Who sent me the messages? Nathan's expression changed. I don't know. Grace immediately stood. Then how did you find me? Nathan didn't answer. Grace's eyes narrowed. How did you know I was here? Nathan remained silent. Grace stepped backward. You followed me. No. Then how did you find me? I tracked your phone. Grace froze. How? Nathan looked away. Your phone has a tracking application. Grace's blood ran cold. Who installed it? Nathan said nothing. Grace immediately understood. Victoria. Her phone. The hospital. The messages. The people following her. Victoria, might have been monitoring her location. Grace pulled out her phone. Nathan stopped her. Don't. Why? Because if they can track you, they'll know where you are. Grace stared. Nathan reached into his pocket. Give me the phone. Grace hesitated, then handed it over. Nathan removed the battery. He broke the device apart. Grace stared. Why didn't you tell me this earlier? Because I needed to know whether you could trust me. Grace looked at him. And now? Nathan smiled sadly. I still don't know. Before Grace could answer, her phone began ringing. Nathan had already removed the battery. Yet the screen lit up. Both of them froze. Grace's blood turned to ice. Nathan slowly looked at the phone. That's impossible. The phone continued ringing. Then the screen displayed one word. ETHAN. Grace stared. How? Nathan shook his head. That's not Ethan. The call ended. Immediately, another message appeared. You have 5 minutes. Grace's heart pounded. Nathan looked toward the church doors. We need to leave. Why? Because they're here. Grace heard it too. Cars. Outside. Multiple vehicles. Nathan moved toward the window. He looked through the broken glass. 3 black SUVs. Grace's face went pale. Who are they? Nathan whispered. Not Marcus's men. Grace froze. Then who? Nathan turned. That's the problem. The church doors suddenly slammed open. Grace screamed. A man entered. He was holding a gun. Nathan pushed Grace behind him. Don't move. The man looked at Nathan. Then Grace. Where is the drive? Nathan didn't answer. The man raised the weapon. Grace's heart stopped. Then another voice came from outside. Don't shoot them. Grace recognized the voice. Victoria. Her face went completely white. Victoria stepped into the church. She was wearing a dark coat. Her hair was wet. And beside her stood Marcus Hayes. Grace stared at them. Victoria. Victoria looked at her. For the first time, there was no smile. No fake tears. No manipulation. Only hatred. Marcus walked forward. Give me the drive. Grace held her jacket. No. Marcus smiled. Then Ethan dies. Grace froze. Victoria immediately looked at her father. Don't. Marcus turned. What? You promised. Promised what? Victoria's face became tense. You said no one would get hurt. Marcus laughed. Do you still believe that? Victoria stared at him. Marcus turned toe.